We begin with our chanting. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. I think today in this section of Buddha and his Dhamma, we are going to read out 4 pages. But I think these 4 pages are very important. Mute kar dena. I think these 4 pages are very important for us to look into. This is the part 4. This is the part 4 of book 1, and the title of this part is Enlightenment and the Vision of a New Way. So here Baba Sahib Ambedkar is describing the actual event of enlightenment of the Siddhartha Gautama. As we have seen that this Siddhartha Gautama was facing the problem, a big existential problem of conflict in the society, and he was to leave his home because of the conflict between the Sakyans and Kolyans, and we have seen how it was a problematic situation for Siddhartha Gautama. And then again, the news came that, there was no quarrel between the Sakyas and Kolyans, so he could go back. But he chose not to go back because he saw the problem in the bigger perspective. The problem of conflict between in the families, between the countries, between the brother and sister, between the father and the son, and so on and so forth. And we know that then he explored the various practices existing at the time of Siddhartha Gautama. He experimented with Samadhi Marga, and we have seen that description as to how Siddhartha Gautama experimented with the Samadhi Marga. Then we know that Siddhartha Gautama also experimented with what is called the self-mortification or asceticism. And he has undergone severe form of asceticism, as we have seen, and as Baba Sahib Ambedkar has described in this book 1 of the Buddha and his Dhamma. I think today is a very important section that we need to, and as I said that we have to read Buddha and his Dhamma again and again so that we can begin to see the depth of the Buddha and his Dhamma all the time. So today we are going to look at part 4, and I recommend that you read it all the time whenever you get an opportunity, because even reading it for several times, I can see that there is so much depth in this part 4. So the title of the part 4 is Enlightenment and the Vision of a New Way, and it's divided into various sections. 4 sections there. One is meditation for new light. Now this word is very important: new light and meditation. Then second, enlightenment. The third is the discovery of a new Dhamma. And 4, Gautam, who was a Bodhisattva after Samma Bodhi, becomes a Buddha. So these 4 sections, I think, are absolutely important for us to study, because there is so much to understand, so much to grasp. I'm going to tell you, how vast is this section. Okay. So we know that Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama found that the path of asceticism is not working. It's not leading him to the solutions of the problems that he was facing, and therefore he decided to take the food. And we know that Sujata offered the Buddha the milk rice, and after that Buddha decided that he will pursue the truth in other way. Now this verse 2 of the section 1 is so important. See, I'm going to read it for you. The failure was so complete that it could have led anyone into a state of frustration, because you are struggling for 6 hours. You are practicing meditation. You are learning Samadhi Marga. You are attending to the various stages of dhyana. And then you are again going back to the self-abnegation, the practice of self-mortification. And then what do you get? You don't get answer to your question. That is, anybody will get frustrated. So what Baba Sahib Ambedkar puts here is the failure was so complete that it could have led anyone into a state of frustration. He was, of course, sorry, but frustration as such did not touch him. Siddhartha Gautama was not frustrated at all when he failed in the ascetic practices, because the ascetic practices didn't yield him any truth, neither the Samadhi Marga, as we have seen. Now, when Buddha ate the food given by Sujata, something, the night before he sat for his reflections, for his meditation, he had 5 dreams. Now, actually, I should give this 5 dreams to you for as a homework, because Baba Ambedkar mentioned just 5 dreams, and I think these 5 dreams needs to be really studied as to what were the 5 dreams of the Buddha before his enlightenment. I have been often quoting one of his dreams. Actually, these 5 dreams of the Buddha is very crucial, because one of the dreams of the Buddha is directly related to the social moments. So one of his dreams was like this, that when Buddha sat, Buddha had a dream, 5 dreams, but I'm going to just tell you one dream of the Buddha. The dream is like this, that Buddha is sitting under the tree, Bodhi tree, and the 4 birds of, different colors, 4 colors, came from 4 different directions and touched the Buddha's body. And upon touching the Buddha's body, all of them become colorless. Okay, now the straightforward interpretation of this dream would be that the Buddha had a dream of a casteless, classless, colorless society. He had a dream of a society where everybody will be the same. That is that was the 4th dream of the Buddha. So Buddha had 5 dreams before he sat onto the path of his enlightenment for the new light. So one of his dream was like this, that Buddha is reclining in the Jambudvipa. His head is touching the Himalaya. His water is in the Arabian Ocean, and his hands are stretched so that he is covering the entire India. That means that his shasana will be all over India. And there are, of course, the Buddha is rising from the dirt, but the dirt is not touching him. That means he will be in the world like a lotus in the mud. Okay, there is no mud, there is no lotus. Just like that, Buddha will be unstained, will not be touched by the impurities of the world. So there are 5 dreams of the Buddha, and I would recommend you very much. I only told you the 4th dream of the Buddha, that he had a dream of a casteless, classless, colorless society. And I would recommend you all to do this as an exercise to study the 5 dreams of the Buddha. Is that okay for you? This is a homework for you, okay, to study the rest of the 4 dreams of the Buddha. Now, when Buddha has decided to, when Buddha had this dream, he was sure that he will attain to enlightenment, that he will see the new light. He was sure because he had those 5 dreams. But then again, he wanted to testify his resolve. And this, I told you in the beginning that some of the stories, some of the text are symbolic in meaning, and they connote something very deep. So what Buddha did, there was a bowl given by the Sujata's Dasi, and Buddha Siddhartha Gautama threw it in the river. And he said that if I am to attain, I'm going to read this, very important. If I am to have enlightenment, let the bowl ascend the stream. The bowl will not follow the normal flow of the water, but it will ascend the stream. And it has a very deep meaning. That means that the Buddha was going against the stream. Like most of us, we follow the what I would say, the stream. We follow the fashions of the time. We follow what is going on in the society. We follow what is all over, taking place all around us. But here is Siddhartha Gautama. He's throwing the bowl in the water, and he's saying that, it's very beautiful. If I am to have enlightenment, let the bowl ascend the stream. If not, let it go down. The vessel indeed began to float against the current, and at last sank near the abode of Kala, a Naga king. Now these Naga kings, Nagas are coming all over the places. Then we will see another Naga king, Muchalinda Naga, who will come and protect the Buddha. So now I think that, as Baba Ambedkar taught us in the revolution and counter revolution in ancient India, that these Nagas, Yakshas, Gandharva, they are to be taken as the human communities. So let's, around that place there must be a king, and king doesn't mean that, a very big king. That's somebody who is having sovereignty over a few villages was also called a Raja, a king, somebody who is governing with the consent of the people. So there must be this king whose name was Naga, Naga king, whose name was Kala. Okay. So the bowl went to his near his abode and sank. Okay. So the Buddha left Uruvela. Before that time, Buddha was in Uruvela, and he left Uruvela and he went to Gaya. Now he saw a banyan tree. Now this is a little bit of a mistake here, because banyan tree or people tree, sometimes they are the same tree, but we know that it's a people tree, Bodhi tree. So he thought that he should sit under it in meditation in the hope of a new light dawning upon him and enabling him to find a way which would solve his problem. So now Siddhartha Gautama sat cross-legged, upright under the banyan tree. Okay, now this upright posture is very important if we want to cogitate or if we want to reflect on something. Somewhere else, Baba Ambedkar has written that, if you want to really study something, if your spine is upright, it's conducive to your, concentration and your engagement with that subject. Now here is a very traditional position of Buddha we see all the time. Gautama sat cross-legged and upright under the banyan tree, determined to achieve enlightenment, he said to himself. Now this is very important. Now 6 years the Buddha spent practicing Samadhi Marga and practicing the asceticism. But even now, after meeting so much of he's not getting the answer to his question, he's not frustrated, but he is resolving. And I think that Gautama's resolve is very important, because it said that when you resolve to do something, then something mysterious happens. That is what the poetic expression is, that when you try to give yourself fully to something, there's something extraordinary happens. Now here is the same way we can look at this verse 7 of this section 1. I'm going to read it for you. He said to himself, skin, sinew, and bone may dry up as they will. My flesh and my blood may dry in my body, but without attaining complete enlightenment, I will not leave this seat. Now see, this is the very simple explanation given by Baba Ambedkar, and this is what is Buddha and his Dhamma. Baba Ambedkar reaches to the heart of it, and he cuts off what is not essential. Now there are stories about this, very poetical stories about it, that the Buddha was sitting on the Vajrasana, was about to sit on the diamond throne, the Vajrasana, and Mara comes and he says, what is your right to sit on this Vajrasana? And then Siddhartha Gautama said that I have been practicing purity for so many births. And then he said, he touches the earth like this, Bhumi Sparsha Mudra, and he says that the earth is a witness to my commitment to the enlightenment, and therefore I have a right to sit in this place. But what Baba Ambedkar does, because this is a book that is supposed to be a Bible for the Buddhist, which will have in one book everything. So these are the things that we can unpack afterwards. But here is very important, and this is the way Baba Ambedkar very systematically written here. Otherwise, this one page will take many pages to explain this, and people do not have that much time, as Baba Ambedkar said, to study everything. Those who want to study, they can do it. But here it's very important that the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, resolves that even if I die, I'm not going to get up from here. I'm going to pursue the truth. Now see again the entry of the Kala. This Kala's entry I have not seen in a lot of places, but here again Kala enters, the king of Nagas. Now Baba Ambedkar calls him the king of Nagas. So there must be a community of Nagas, of which Kala was a king, whose majesty was like the lord of elephants, and his wife. Now see, the lord of elephants, because Naga is also word for elephants. In Pali text, Naga, Matanga, elephant are the same synonymous. Okay, so it's not just toys born Naga, cobra, but it's also referred to elephants. Was like the lord of elephants. So Baba Ambedkar drops a lot of linguistic hints here and there that we need to look into depth look into it very deeply. So what and his wife. So Baba Ambedkar given the name of his wife also. Her name is Suvarna Prabhas. Now Suvarna means gold, Prabhas means light, golden light. So her name is Golden Light, and there is a sutra in Mahayana text called Suvarna Prabhasa Sutra, the Sutra of Golden Light. Okay, so this what I'm trying to get it at is even the names are important. We have to look at the names. What do they mean? So Suvarna Prabhas is a sutra, is a golden light. Having been awakened by the vision of Gautama sitting under the banyan tree, uttered this in praise of him, being sure that he was destined to attain perfect knowledge. So Naga, because I think mythologically, even if we go historically, there must be, the Siddhartha Gautama before his enlightenment must be a popular figure that people knew that there was somebody, a sage, who is practicing deep and severe austerities. So, this is very poetic, 9 and 10 verse. So I'm going to read this 9 and 10 verse. In as much as the earth, pressed down by thy feet, O sage, resounds repeatedly, and in as much as thy splendor shines forth like the sun, thou shalt assuredly reap the desired fruit. Then 10th, in as much as flocks of birds fluttering in the sky offer the reverential salutation, O lotus-eyed one, and as much as gentle breezes blow in the sky, thou shalt certainly attain thy object. Okay, now this is what the king of Nagas, Kala, and his wife Suvarna Pravas, they chant like this. So as he sat for the meditation under the tree, naturally a lot of evil thoughts began to come into his head, and then there is what Baba Ambedkar mythologically called the children of Mara. So there is a figure of Mara. Now don't take this figure literally, because Mara has many meanings in Buddhism. One of the meaning of Mara is one who defeats you in your purpose, in your goal. So Mara has a lot of different meanings, and here the meaning of the Mara has to be taken as Baba Ambedkar said, evil thoughts and evil passion. Mara disturbs us all the time. There is nobody who is not disturbed by Mara. So we are disturbed by, like, we can study these 4 Maras in the future, because that's not our topic today. But I'm just telling you that Mara can be seen in many different ways, as an obstacle to our freedom, as an obstacle to our development, as an obstacle to our attaining to the state of enlightenment. So Gautama was greatly frightened lest they should overpower him and defeat his purpose. Okay. And he knew that in this battle with evil passions, many rishis and Brahmins have succumbed. So he summoned all the courage he had and said to Mara. Now, this is very important. Verse number 14. Faith is found in me. Faith is found in me. I have strong faith and heroism and wisdom. So I have heroism and I have wisdom. They reside in me. How can evil passions defeat me? The streams even of rivers may this wind dry up. Ye would not be unable to dry up my resolutions when I am so intent. This simile of wind drying up the river is equated with Gautama's resolve. He says that even the river will dry up with the wind, but my resolution to attain will not dry up, will never exhaust. When I am so intent, when somebody is so intent, when you are intent, when you are dedicated, when you are seeking something with total being, then nobody can stop you. That's what the message here. Then what Siddhartha Gautama says, better to me is death in battle than that I should be defeated in life. He said, I don't want to get defeated in life. The evil passion entered the mind of Gautama as a crow goes after a stone that looks like a hump of fat, thinking surely, here I shall find a tender morsel, here perchance is something sweet. When the evil thoughts started entering in Siddhartha's mind, they didn't find any place to dwell in his mind. Just like a crow, he thinks that there is a lump of meat, and the crow attacks the lump of meat. But what happens is it's a stone, thinking that it's a meat. Just like that, Mara, when the evil passions entered in the mind of the Buddha, the evil passions did not find a place to reside in the mind of the Buddha. And finding no sweetness there, the crow departs thence. So like a crow attacking a rock, the evil passions left Gautama in disgust. So you see, what is so beautifully expressed here is that Buddha's mind was so pure that the evil passions, the evil thoughts couldn't find any lodging, any boarding in his mind. And I think this is very significant for us to understand that his mind was so cultivated even that time that the evil thoughts couldn't find a dwelling place for them. Now, this section 2, titled as enlightenment. So what happened beneath the Bodhi tree? Now, this half a page, one page is very important, and I think we can think about it for a long time. But I'm just going to talk about it generally. So Siddhartha has already collected food that will last for a few weeks, and he thought, then when the evil thoughts went away from his mind, he took food and he was refreshing himself. And then it took 4 weeks of meditation to obtain enlightenment for the Buddha. For the Siddhartha Gautama, it took 4 weeks. And I think that's very important. He reached final enlightenment in 4 stages. Now, see, these 4 stages of his attainment of enlightenment, they need a lot of discussion. They need a lot of explanation. They need a lot of thinking about. They need a lot of practicing. Now, in the first stage, he called forth reason and investigation. Now, I'm going to give you the technical words for it in Buddhism, in Pali text. They are called Vitarka Vichar. If you want to write it down, you can. Vitarka Vichar. Vitarka means taking your mind to an object, and Vichar means your mind is hovering around that object. That's called the process of Vitarka Vichar. So Vitarka means taking your mind to the object. Our mind is everywhere, but we have to bring it at one place. So traditionally, it's like the cleaning the pot. So how do you clean the pot? First you hold the pot and then you clean the pot. Okay, like that. If you want to understand anything, the first stage is Vitarka. You have to take your mind to that object of thought or object of or a thing, whatever it is. Okay, and then you have to hold it, and then you have to reflect around it. So that first stage, Babasaheb Ambedkar has described here. It is the first stage he called forth reason and investigation. So we have to bring in reason and investigation. His seclusion helped him to attain it easily. So what Babasaheb Ambedkar is saying, that if you want to reflect on something deep, if you are secluded, you can do it very meticulously. So this process we can take in our day-to-day life also, as to, we have to take your mind to that object and reflect on it continuously. In the second stage, he added concentration. Concentrations means ekagrata. All your energies are aggregated together. Ekaggata. In Pali, the word is ekaggata. Ekaggata means the highest peak, where all your energies have concentrated at one point. Okay, that is called ekagrata. Now, traditionally, there are in the Buddhist meditational text, there are 2 stages, like Vitarka Vichar, Piti, Sukh, Ekagrata. Now, Piti and Sukh is missing here. Okay, but it doesn't matter, because the concentration include Priti and Sukh. So when you are reflecting on something, if you are so much focused on it, there is a natural way you get what is called ecstasy. When you are focused on something, when you are absorbed into something, you have ecstasy, which is called Priti, and after some time that subsides and become tranquil like a ocean, which is called Sukh. And when your mind becomes tranquil like that, there is a natural disposition towards Ekagrata. All your energies begin to congeal together, begin to concentrate together. That's called Ekagrata. So the second stage is Ekagrata. The mind is completely focused, completely united, completely, I would say, integrated, if you want to use the word. Now, this word is important. All your energies are coming together. We can say that the volitional, the psychological, the intellectual or emotional, all your energies are coming together. All energies of the Buddha came together. In the third stage, he brought to his aid equanimity and mindfulness. So then equanimity traditionally in Buddhism is called samatha. Samatha means the mind has now become completely equanimous, and there was an alertness, mindfulness. There was this very deep alertness. Mindfulness is also called the alertness of the mind. Okay, so it is not equanimity. Equanimity doesn't mean the dead mind. It's a mind which is very concentrated, but at the same time, it has that deep alertness. In the fourth and final stage, he added purity to equanimity. Now, even if your mind is equanimous, there is samatha, but without purity, it's not ready for understanding of the truth. And equanimity to mindfulness. So I think this verses 4, 5, 6, 7, we have to read it again and again. Okay. And we have to understand this, how Buddha prepared his mind to investigate the problem that was troubling him since he left his home. Now, 8th verse. Thus, with mind concentrated. I would underline every word. Thus, with mind concentrated, purified, spotless, with defilement gone, supple, means the mind is ready to work. It is ready to move. It's so flexible. It's so, I would say, light, dexterous. It is ready to work. It's ready to think about any problem. Firm. It's steadfast, impassionate. And the most important is not forgetting what he's after. The Buddha never forgot. Gautama never forgot what he was after. Not forgetting what he's after, Gautama concentrated himself on the problem of finding an answer to the question which had troubled him. On the night of the last day of the 4th week, light dawned upon him. He realized that there were 2 problems. The first problem was that there was suffering in the world, and the second problem was how to remove this suffering and make mankind happy. Now you can see the way Siddhartha Gautama had, put himself to understanding the problem, to understand the solution. Now this method of Siddhartha to understand, to reflect on, to think about things and thoughts and objects of mind, is so beautifully presented by Baba Saheb Ambedkar. These 4, 5, 6, 7 verses, I think in this section are to be read again and again, again and again, again and again. And we have to bring them, into our everyday reflection about what is happening. So in the end, after meditation for 4 weeks, darkness was dispelled. Light arose. Ignorance was dispelled and knowledge arose. He saw a new way. He saw a new way. Now this description, as I told you that Buddha and his Dhamma is, every sentence matters, because Baba Saheb Ambedkar has done very careful study and, thought about how to communicate. It's not easy to communicate what had happened in those 4 weeks. And people, a lot of people will argue, doubt, discuss and whatever. That's not our concern, because we are concerned with Baba Sahib's representation of the Buddhism. And I think unless we grasp what Baba Sahib Ambedkar wanted to communicate, teach us, Buddhism in India cannot succeed. So we have to understand it very clearly, the vision of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. And the very, in a one page, Baba Sahib Ambedkar is describing, and in the future, you can all look into the various Buddhist texts. I encourage you to read various Buddhist texts and make sense of it in the light of the Baba Sahib Ambedkar, Baba Sahib's understanding of it. I'm going to read it again. So in the end, after meditation for 4 weeks, darkness was dispelled. Light arose. So whenever there is a light, the darkness automatically goes away. Ignorance was dispelled and knowledge arose. He saw a new way. Very small sentence, but so pithy and so important. He saw a new way. And the next section, 3rd, is titled as the discovery of a new Dhamma. So you see the word here, the discovery. It was discovery. It was not revelation. Nothing was revealed to him by any external agency or any god, or there was no vision dawned to him, inspired by others. It was his discovery. The word, I told you, every single word matters in Buddhism. It was his discovery. And what was his discovery? His discovery of a new Dhamma. He discovered the new Dhamma. So when Gautama was sitting under the Bodhi tree, he was under the influence of Sankhya philosophy, and we are going to look at Sankhya philosophy in the next section. I told you that, we have to have patience. All the questions will be answered. So what is Sankhya philosophy? We are going to understand what is the Sankhya philosophy in the next class. what is the Vedic philosophy and whatnot. We are going to understand them in the next class. But here it's very important to keep in mind that Siddhartha Gautama was in the grip of Sankhya philosophy. So what was the Sankhya philosophy in a nutshell? In the verse 2, that suffering and unhappiness in the world he thought was an incontrovertible fact. That suffering is there in the world and it can never be ended was the philosophy of Sankhya. Very beautiful philosophy. And Baba Saheb Ambedkar has given a beautiful description of a summary of Sankhya philosophy in the next section. But here what is suffice here today is to understand that Sankhya philosophy, Kapila, Buddha was born in Kapilavastu, the city named after a very great philosopher of that time, Kapila. And Kapila was saying that suffering and unhappiness in the world he thought was incontrovertible fact. It is the fact of the life that suffering cannot be ended. Gautama was, however, interested in knowing how to do away with suffering. Gautama wanted to know, okay, there is suffering, but how to do away with it? This problem, the Sankhya philosophy did not deal with. It is therefore on this problem, how to remove suffering and unhappiness, that he concentrated his mind. Naturally, the first question he asked himself was, what are the causes of suffering and unhappiness which an individual undergoes? Why an individual undergoes suffering? What are the causes and conditions by which an individual, now the word here is important, individual. And then in the Buddha and Dhamma, we hear about Dhamma is social, it's fundamentally social, so on and so forth. But here the word uses individual. So why would an individual suffer? What are the causes of his suffering, her suffering, like that? His second question was how to remove unhappiness. To both these questions, he got a right answer, which is called Samma Bodhi. The right answer to the causes and condition, understanding the causes and condition and ending the suffering, the right answer in 2 words, Samma Bodhi. I have never come across this word, but this is a beautiful word that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has given us, Samma Bodhi. We have heard about Samma Ditti, we have heard about Samma Sankalpa, we have heard about Samma Vacha, so on and so forth in the Noble Eightfold Path. But here the word is Samma Bodhi. And what is Samma Bodhi? Right enlightenment. It is because of this that the banyan tree has come to be known as the Bodhi tree, because he attained to Bodhi. So what Buddha attained under the people tree or whatever banyan tree is the Bodhi. He got the answer to the question of the suffering. Actually, this section 4 and the title is this: Gautama, who was a Bodhisattva, after Samma Bodhi becomes a Buddha. Now this section, it's only 3 pages. These 3 pages, if we want to study, it will take a lifetime for us to study. Why? Because this section is drawn as to how Bodhisattva becomes a Buddha. And that is the whole question about Buddhism, as to how Bodhisattva becomes the Buddha, or how we can become a Buddha. There is this very wonderful teaching, and particularly this sutra is called Dasya Bhumika Sutra. And it doesn't come in the Pali text. It comes in the Mahayana Sanskrit text, the Buddhist Sanskrit text. And the name of the text, I would like you to write it down, Dasya Bhumika Sutra. And all the great teachers, philosophers in Buddhism, Buddhist history, has written about this sutra. Nagarjuna has written about this sutra. Vasubandhu has written in this sutra. This sutra was translated from maybe Gandhari or whatever language into Chinese by Kumarji very early on. Then Bodhi Ruchi translated the Vasubandhu's version in Chinese. So this is a very thick sutra, and Baba Saheb Ambedkar has given just 3 pages on this sutra, because we know Baba Saheb's intention. He wanted to give us the pointers. He wanted to give us the pointers as to where to look at. And we have to look at this Dasya Bhumika Sutra. Maybe one day when we have more time, we can talk about the Dasya Bhumika Sutra. But I am going to interesting sutra. So what I am going to just read through it, but going to gloss over a few words. because I think this 3 pages summary is worth reading it. Maybe we will take a little bit more time today, but I think this is very important. Gautama, who was a bodhisattva, after Samma Bodhi becomes a Buddha. Verse 1, before enlightenment, Gautama was only a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva. It is after reaching enlightenment that he became a Buddha. So, who and what is bodhisattva? See the style of Babasaheb Ambedkar's tool to convince us. He is asking who and what is a bodhisattva. He answers in the next line. A bodhisattva is a person who is seeking to be a Buddha. So bodhisattva is somebody who is whose intention is to become the Buddha. Now, whoever is having the intention to become the Buddha is a bodhisattva. But merely having intention is not enough. Merely having intention is not enough. How does a bodhisattva becomes a Buddha? How does a bodhisattva becomes a Buddha? And then there are this beautiful descriptions of various stages. A bodhisattva must be a bodhisattva for 10 lives in succession. Now you don't have to take it as the 10 lives in succession in a way that we talk in terms of the rebirth and birth. If you want to take it, you can. But as I told you, the sutra is called Dasa Bhumika. So there are 10 grounds, and all the grounds are progression towards the Buddha. So there is a first ground, and the first ground is called Pramudita. In his first life, he acquires Pramudita. So we can say in the first plane or in the first Bhumi, the Bodhisattva is full of tremendous joy, incomparable joy, Pramudita. So if anybody wants to become the Buddha, it's very important to cultivate joy. Now, Buddhism is looked at as a philosophy or a religion which talks about suffering all the time, which talks about Four Noble Truths, so on and so forth. But here, very beautifully, the first ground itself is a ground of joy, Pramudita. In his first life, he acquires mudita, joy. The Bodhisattva, having blown off his impurities as the smith blows the dross from silver or gold, whatever, reflects that man who has been reckless and become sober brightens up the world like the moon freed from clouds. Joy springs in him, realizing this, and he is fervent in his desire to benefit all beings. Now see why this is important is this verse 6. Where is the source of joy? So when our impurities are blown off, like from the gold or from the silver, it shines. So if we are reckless, but if we become sober, then what happens? It brightens the world like the moon freed from clouds. Joy springs up in him, realizing this. So realizing the purity within him, the joy springs in him. And what is next? He's fervent in his desire to benefit all beings. He's so fervent in his desire to benefit everybody. He's so fervent, he's so committed to benefit all beings. So if you want to be ultimately joyful, if you want that pramudita, if you want that mudita, we have to, just like the goldsmith will remove the dross from the gold. We have to remove the dross from our minds. We have to make our mind pure. And not only that, we have to cultivate that fervent desire to benefit all beings. And that's the ultimate source of joy. That's the ultimate source of happiness, mudita, pramudita. In his second life or the second plane or the second ground, he progresses. So every stage is going towards the Buddhahood, is going towards the Buddha, is going towards the enlightenment. So on the second ground, he acquires Vimala. Vimala means purity. He acquires Vimala, purity. The Bodhisattva has now removed all thoughts of lust. All the thought of lust are removed from Bodhisattva's mind. He is kind. He is kind to all. See, he is not just kind. But the next sentence goes like this. He is kind to all. He neither flatters the vices of men nor disparages their virtues. Now, vices and virtues, we have a very limited definition. But here, Babasaheb Ambedkar has expanded the definition of vices and virtues. Even flattering the vices of men is not ethical. Even to praise the vices is not admissible. not disparages their virtues. So if we see virtue in the world, we don't disparage it. Now, why this is important? Because that is how the ultimate source of purity is. The purity of a human being has to do with the world as well. That whether we are encouraging the evil thoughts in the world, whether we are encouraging the good thoughts in the world, that's also the part of your inner purity. So when we attend to that, the second ground is called Vimala. And as you advance forth on these grounds, 10 grounds, there are 10 grounds. We are going to look at that. 10 grounds. As we advance on ground, from ground up to ground up to ground up to, what happens is, our mind becomes like the Buddha's mind. The second plane that we have seen. In his third life, he acquires Prabhakari. All words important: Mudita, Vimala, Prabhakari, brightness. Prabhakari means brightness. The intellect of the Bodhisattva now becomes as bright as a mirror. So I told you, ancient time, they used to polish the metal and make it a mirror. So the more you polish it, the more brightens the surface of the metal. Now here what happens is that the Buddha's mind, the Bodhisattva's mind is so polished that it becomes bright like a mirror. It reflects everything. He fully knows and grasps the truth of anatta and anicca. At the third ground, the Bodhisattva grasps anatta and anicca. His only wish is for the highest wisdom. Now he's striving for prajna, mahaprajna. And for this, he is ready to sacrifice everything. For the quest of knowledge, for the quest of truth, the Bodhisattva is ready to sacrifice anything. Now, I just want to take a call from you, because our classes are to be for just 1 hour, and there is so much to go on and on. So what do you think? Should we go on, and we stop here, take a pause, and discuss for next 20 minutes?
You can continue for some time, then we can reflect. Because your explanation is very nice, so we would like to hear.
So what we will do, we will go on, because then we can, next class we can reflect on it for next 20 minutes, because I will take 20 minutes to finish it. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Now the fourth ground of the Bodhisattva, these are the gradual development. It's the evolution of a Bodhisattva from Bodhisattvahood to Buddhahood. This is the evolution. What happens in the fourth ground is he acquires Arshish Mati, intelligence of fire. Look at the words. I told you that the words are very important. He gets the intelligence of fire. Now, what is the intelligence of the fire? We have to reflect on it. What is the intelligence of the fire? To burn, isn't it? So you can understand that the Buddhism is not something static or stagnant philosophy or religion. It's so full of, I would say, fire. Full of passion in a positive sense. In his fourth life, he acquires Arshish Mati, intelligence of fire. The Bodhisattva in this life fixes his mind on the eightfold path. Now, this fourth ground is very important, because at the fourth ground, the Bodhisattva understand the entire Buddhism. 37 Bodhipakya Dhamma. They are called the 37 Bodhipakya Dhamma, which we will study afterwards. 37 Bodhipakya Dhamma. So, the description of Eight Noble Eightfold Path, the 4 contemplation, the 4 Satipathan, then 4 Iddhi Bala, then 5 spiritual Bala, so on and so forth. Okay, we are going to look at that. But I think this is not the time at this moment to look at that. But you understand that at the fourth level, the Bodhisattva understand the entire dynamics as to how the Buddhism works on the level of mind. These are all list of the traditional Buddhist practices. So already understood everything there at the level of 4. At the fourth level, the Bodhisattva has already understood the Noble Eightfold Path, the 4 Iddhi Bala and all. I can give you the list of that afterwards. In his fifth ground, he acquires Sudurjaya, difficult to conquer. He fully understands. 1 minute. So in his fifth life, he acquires Sudurjaya, difficult to conquer. Now the Bodhisattva becomes difficult to conquer, and only 2 lines. He fully understands the connection of the relative and the absolute. Now this, what is relative, what is absolute, and what is the connection between these two? The Buddhist philosophy. Okay, but this is not our class on the Buddhist philosophy. We can think about what is the relative truth, and what is the absolute truth, and how they are connected, and how Bodhisattva understands that connection. In his fifth life, he acquired Sudurjaya, difficult to conquer. He cannot be conquered, defeated now. Bodhisattva cannot be conquered now. In his sixth life, he becomes Abhimukhi. In the sixth ground, in his evolution, at the sixth ground level, the Bodhisattva becomes Abhimukhi, which means in this stage, the Bodhisattva is now prepared fully to grasp the evolution of things. He can see how the things evolve. Very interesting. The words, the choice of the word, evolution of things, its causes, why do they evolve? The 12 Nidanas, in Buddhist philosophy, there is Paticca Samutpad. So there are 12 Nidanas, the 12 chains of Paticca Samutpad. We are going to look into that. And this knowledge called Abhimukhi, this knowledge is called Abhimukhi, awakens the most profound compassion in his heart for all beings blinded by avidya. He sees clearly, and he sees that the world is blinded in the avidya. Looking at that, a compassion takes birth in the Bodhisattva. Most profound compassion. See the choice of the words, most profound compassion in his heart for all beings blinded by avidya. So he sees the world in the ignorance, and his heart is awakened with this profound compassion. In the seventh life, or the seventh ground of his evolution, the Bodhisattva becomes Durangama, going far off. He has gone far off. Now he cannot come back. He has already escaped. He cannot come back. The Bodhisattva is now beyond time and space. His mind has gone beyond time and space. He is one with infinity, just like a sky everywhere. There is a description of a sky. Like a sky, it's infinity. But he still retains Namarupa, but he still remains his body and his Namarupa, his body and mind, he still retains out of his great compassion for all beings. He doesn't have to be, he has already attained, but he retains his body and mind for the great compassion for the being. He is secluded from others, in that the lust of the world no more cling to him than water to a lotus leaf. You see the lotus leaf, the water never holds on to it. Just like that, the Buddha is in the world, but is not touched by the world. He quenches desires in his fellow beings. He can immediately know what is the desires of the human beings. He can tell you, he can give you exact teaching. At this level, at the level of Abhimukhi, Buddha sees all the different minds, and he can give the exact teaching that we need, depending on our disposition. He quenches desires in his fellow beings, practices charity, patience, tactfulness, energy, calmness, intelligence, and the highest wisdom. They are the paramitas that the Buddha cultivates. So the Bodhisattva cultivate at the seventh level. At the sixth level, the seventh ground of his evolution, Bodhisattva becomes a Durangama. No, Durangama we have seen. Yes. So we have seen Durangama, that the Buddha has gone beyond. He cannot come back to this conditioned world. He has gone behind. Verse 13. While in this life he knows the Dharma, but present it in ways understood by the people. He knows he must be tactful and patient. Whatever men do to him, he bears with equanimity, for he knows that it is through ignorance they misunderstand his motives. At the time, he never slackens his energy to benefit all beings, nor does he withdraw his mind from wisdom. Therefore, misfortune can never turn him from righteous path. So this is the seventh ground of his evolution. That's how the Bodhisattva evolves. And I think this description, the verse 12 and 13 of this part, we have to read. I think this entire section we have to read again and again and again and think on, reflect on. This is so powerful. In his eighth life, he becomes Achala. Achala means immovable, unshakable. He cannot be shaken. He cannot be shaken. In the stage of Achala or immovable, all striving on the part of the Bodhisattva cease. He doesn't have to make efforts, because now he has attained to that. Everything becomes spontaneous for him. He follows good spontaneously. Whatever he will do, he will succeed in, because he understands the law of causation. He understands the Paticca Samutpada. Whatever he does, he succeeds. In his ninth life or ninth stage or ninth ground, he becomes Sadhumati. Sadhumati means what? This is the stage or condition of one who has vanquished and penetrated all the dharmas or system. Here, all the philosophies, all the dharmas, all the systems, everything has been understood, mastered by the Buddha, and he does not enter time. He becomes timeless. So he's not governed by these thoughts and concepts. He's not governed by ideas because he has penetrated through them. He's not governed by ideologies. He has gone beyond that. And in his 10th life, he becomes Dharma Megha. The Bodhisattva attains the infinite dive in the eye of a Buddha. Now that is at the 10th ground of his evolution. The Bodhisattva becomes the infinite dive in of Buddha, eye of the Buddha. It's called Buddha Chakshu. There are various kinds of drishtis, but here he attains to the Daivain of the Buddha. So you see here that the description here is not personal. These are the stage which are described by Babasaheb Ambedkar and before him in Dash Bhumika Sutra, how the Bodhisattva becomes a Buddha. So Dhamma Megha means the cloud of the Dhamma. It rains all the time. It rains Dharma all the time. Continuously raining. Now even today when the Buddha is gone, his Dhamma is raining everywhere. The Bodhisattva acquires these 10 powers which are necessary for him when he becomes a Buddha. This is how the Bodhisattva evolves from mere Bodhisattva to Buddha. And these are the 10 powers that he had. The Bodhisattva must not only acquire these 10 powers as he evolves from stage to stage. Now, Babasaheb Ambedkar uses the word evolves from stage to stage. So you can take it, if you don't want to take it as a lifetime after lifetime, you can take it as stage to stage. But he must also practice to perfection the 10 paramitas. Now there are 10 paramitas. We are going to look at the 10 paramitas. The Bodhisattva has to practice 10 paramitas. One paramita is to be the end of one life. Specialization in paramitas must go stage by stage. One paramita in one life and not a little of one and a little of the other. So for example, Dana paramita, the first paramita, the Bodhisattva has to practice it so deeply, so meticulously that there is no scope for not perfecting it. The Bodhisattva practices Dana to the extent that he is ready to give his life for the well-being of others. He is ready to give his, and there are stories of Jataka. There are more than 500 stories of Jataka, which we can read. And Babasaheb Ambedkar has clear doubt about the Jataka so well here. Because a lot of our people think that the Jatakas are the stories where the Buddha had previous lives and all. How do we believe it and all? But Babasaheb Ambedkar has very beautifully answered our question in this section. So what Babasaheb Ambedkar says that it is only when he is doubly equipped that a Bodhisattva becomes qualified for becoming a Buddha. The Buddha is a culminating point in the life of a Bodhisattva. So if we want to understand Buddha, we have to understand Bodhisattva. And we have to understand the 10 bhumis of Bodhisattva. Now, there are a lot of explanations in the community like Shotapanna, Sakrutagami, Anagami, and Arhanta, and so on and so forth. We are not going to go into that description. Okay, that how you become the Buddha, how do you, there is a marga, there is a phala, and whatnot. We can go into that. But here, Babasaheb Ambedkar has given such a vibrant description of how one becomes the Buddha, how a Bodhisattva becomes a Buddha. It is only when he is doubly equipped that a Bodhisattva becomes qualified for becoming a Buddha. The Buddha is a culminating point in the life of a Bodhisattva. The theory of Jataka, or the birth stages of Bodhisattva, appears analogous to the Brahmanic theory of our avatars, this theory of incarnation of God. Now listen carefully this verse. The Jataka theory is based upon the Buddhas having the highest degree of purity as the essence of his being. All the Jataka stories that you read, they talk about the purity of the heart of the Buddha. Some scholars say that they are like psychodramas. When you read them, your heart becomes pure and pure and pure, because that's the pedagogical tool by which you understand how to practice compassion, how to practice virya, and so on and so forth. So Babasaheb says Jataka theory is based upon the Buddha having the highest degree of purity as the essence of his being. The avatar theory does not require that the God should be pure in his making. All that the Brahmanic theory of avatar says is that God saves his followers by taking different forms, although the God may be very impure and immoral in his conduct. 24 and the last. The theory that to be a bodhisattva for 10 lives is a condition, as a condition precedent for becoming a Buddha, has no parallel anywhere. No other religion calls upon its founder to answer such a test. You see, I told you that this Dashabhumika Sutra is a very long sutra. In normal Sanskrit text, it will run in 200, 300 pages. So Baba Sahib Ambedkar has to curtail down to make it into 3 pages. So a lot of things can, clarity can get lost. But, as I told you, we can go back to that Dashabhumika Sutra and read it very carefully to come back to this section and understand it better. Now, the question that we are trying to understand here is that the way Baba Sahib Ambedkar has put the Jataka theory in context, that it talks about the purity as being the essential characteristic of the Bodhisattva or the Buddha vis-a-vis the theory of Avatara, where the God comes, to save the religion, Varna, Shrama, Dharma, and it doesn't matter whether, he is a pure or impure or immoral. So these 4 pages, 4 or 5 pages, 8 pages in total are so important for us to understand that how Siddhartha Gautama, who was a Bodhisattva, becomes the Buddha. And what are the grounds, what is the evolution of a Bodhisattva into the Buddhahood, and all these 10 stages, Pramudita, Vimala, and so on and so forth. I think these stages are so important that, I'm going to read the words again. Mudita, Pramudita, Vimala, Prabhakari, Arshishmati, the intelligence of fire, Sudurjaya, Abhimukhi, Achala, Sadhumati, Dharma Megha. So reflect on this, think about this. This is a very important thing. Think about the process by which Siddhartha Gautama attained to Buddhahood. I think these are all important things spoken in a very few pages by Baba Sahib Ambedkar. We have to read them, we have to study them deeply, carefully, so that we understand what is in those paragraphs. So I think I will pause here and I would we can go for another 5 minutes if there are any questions or any reflections.
So this 11th part has cleared the Pratitya Samutpad, where it is included in Baba said no in the understanding. Yes, because it definitely gives reason and causes and origin causes, and then 12 nidanas he mentioned. Yes. So that is Pratitya Samutpad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mangesh Dada, in the section called enlightenment, point number 8.
Okay.
Point number 8. Every word is very clear, but I am little unsure of this word. Thus, with mind concentrated, purified, spotless, with defilement gone, supple, dexterous, firm, impassionate, not forgetting what he is after. Gautama concentrated himself on the problem of finding an answer to the question of which had troubled him. How do we understand the word impassionate here?
See, impassionate means like we have seen this the part like passions, like the Bodhisattva's passion to Buddhahood. We cannot deny that. So word passion can have many different meanings, but here the word passion has to be taken in terms of lust. Okay, there is no impulses in his mind which are going in a negative direction. So his mind is devoid of passion in a sense of lust, this traditional raga, raga, dvesha, moha, the traditional formulation. So you can take it as a raga or indulgence into something.
Okay.
Isn't it? So we overindulge into something. So that has connotation of not, his mind is not indulged into something. Like if we look at our minds, we are always indulged. Our minds are indulged into something beautiful, something draws us out.
Okay.
In 12th part, Baba Sahib says that Bodhisattva becomes Durangama, means going far up, and he is beyond. Bodhisattva is beyond time and space. He is one with infinity. What exactly does it mean?
See, actually, it means I told you that there is a beautiful description in the original sutra. infinity is to be taken like, he has, it has been explained like a sky, the nature of sky. Sky is everywhere, but it's nowhere. Okay, so the concept of infinity is not, it is mathematical limitlessness. You can take it as a limitlessness. So he's not limited by, the narrow self like we are. He's not limited by the identities. His identity, we should not use identity. He's like, his being becomes limitless. There are no limits to what he cannot do. He's not confined by the conditions.
Dada, in continuation with this, same section 4, ma'am just asked about point number 12. I want us to reflect on point number 15.
15, okay.
In his 9th life, he becomes Sadhumati. This is the stage or condition one has to be vanquished and penetrate all dharma system, all quarters, and does not enter time. So, how do we see this does not enter time? Because he's reflecting on all the lives. Like point number 15 is telling that Baba Sahib is telling that from first life to 9th life, Baba Sahib is describing. So all these lives have a period, right, Dada? So it has a time, it has a period. So what does Baba Sahib actually mean by not entering into something called time?
I think here, this is a very philosophical question, the problem of time in Buddhism. You can write an entire paper on this.
Dada, I am just reflecting on that. Please tell Dada.
Yeah. You can write an entire paper on that. What is how time is conceived in Buddhism. I think we have to look at the Milind Prashna for this. In Milind Prashna, there is a beautiful description of time and timelessness. So there is Kal, there is Akal. If something is circular, how do you know the beginning and end? So how do you know the beginning and end of a circle? So how do you know the past and presence of anything in the circle? So if the time is cyclical, how do you know the past and present of it? Okay, I'm talking on the conceptual level. So I would say that Buddha is not trapped in this same thing happening again and again. He's not trapped in the in what is called cyclical nature of time.
Okay.
But he has broken that, and now he has gone beyond time in a sense that the way it affects us, past, present, and future, it doesn't affect the Buddha.
Okay.
It affects us. No, we are always thinking in terms of times. Our mind is conditioned to think in terms of time.
Yes, Dada.
Isn't it? And time is a part of our worry. Because of time we suffer. Time is suffering. Okay, I'm talking about not about philosophical things, but there is a lot of philosophical ground for this in Buddhism.
Okay, Dada.
So I think
this Milinda Prashna is in which where do I read from Milinda Prashna?
I will give you e-copy.
Okay, Dada.
Okay. Available. Okay.
Okay, Dada. I'll speak to you. Okay, Dada.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else? See, in these classes, what we are trying to do, what is my intention, is to create the interest in you, so that you start reading, applying yourself to study Buddha and Dhamma more and more, so that this becomes a communal exercise. I think this book should become the center of our movement, in the sense that it should be read everywhere, irrespective of whether or even your religious background. Because what Baba Sahib Ambedkar has given us here is a precious summary of the entire, I would say, the Tripitakas, and nobody has got the time. So if the philosophical bends like Praveen wants to explore it philosophically, there are a lot of things that a mind like Praveen can explore. If social worker wants to take something from it, they can take it. So it's a source book, which can answer all our questions. When I say that, I'm not talking in terms of the fundamentalism, book fundamentalist. Like, this is the book. I'm not saying that. What I'm trying to say that is we explore, we understand, we think about every single line, so that we have a clarity. So that's my intention. So today, if you don't understand anything, it doesn't matter. We perceive. There should be a perseverance. We perceive. We have patience. We read it. This is not one day's job. We have to spend a lot of time reflecting on it, studying it. So that's my intention here.
Yes, continuous reading and reading will give the knowledge.
So if there is nothing else, should we end today and we move on to, I think this part, book 1 is very interesting because it sets ground for the rest of the book. So I would recommend you that, you come back here again and again, you read this again and again, think about it, take your notes. And then next time we are going to see part 5, which is very interesting. Part 5 is very interesting. I'm thinking of making a PowerPoint presentation of this, because this has to be unfolded very delicately. So, all right. If nothing there, should we end it for today?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Dada.
But
Thank
we
you.
have one thing, sorry.
Thank you, Mangesh sir. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I think in the discussions, we use, or you use basically also in the book, the heart with the saying, okay, purity of heart or something, right? But isn't that everything is with the mind and nothing else that it is related with these words, or just the metaphors?
This is not a metaphor, because when we advance in the book, we see how much importance the Buddha has given to the human mind. And that part of the discussion which we are going to have in the next next sessions, about the mind and how it creates things and all. Very small description that Baba Ambedkar gives, but we have to really unravel a lot of threads into that and understand it. So I think the purity of mind is the reality, because that this very verse, Sabba Papasya Akaranam Kusalasya Upasampada, talks about that purity of heart. And if you look at the life of Baba Sahib himself, his life was pure life, blameless life. So purity has to do with blaming and blameless. So there are some lives which are blameworthy, they cause so much harm to the world. But there are some lives which are blameless, like, and by that implications they are pure lives. You see what I'm trying to say? So pure lives means the pure minds, because everything proceeds from the mind.
Yes, but then is there anything in the heart, kind of? Or...
No.
Heart and mind are the same thing in Buddhism.
Oh, okay.
Mind.
I thought...
Heart and mind,
Yeah.
in Chinese philosophy, heart and mind is the same character, Shin.
Nam Rupa only.
We will look into that. We will discuss.
Okay.
We will.
Heart is Rupa. Heart is Rupa only.
Yes. We have a Dr. Alka madam here. She's a doctor, so she will be very handy in discussions.
Okay, see, I already dissected and found everything there. So, okay.
All right, then. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Jai Bhim.
Thank you.
Jai.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jai Bhim.